my name is Sean Yu, and I'm a current junior at NLCSJG. I'm going to be explaining you a bit of statistics and also some introductory session to this new programming language called R. But before all of them, before we go into more specific aspects of how to use this programming language, why do we use R? Why do we bother using this new programming language? I think a major characteristic of R that really distinguishes it from other languages like Python or Java is that R has certain data structures that is more custom, that is like specialized for analyzing data for us to do a bit of like statistical analysis, which is, we can also do that in languages like Python or C or Java, but it is substantially easier when we do it in R. So I'm going to be explaining you like a basic introduction to how this new language called R works, because there are things like data frames, things like vectors that don't really exist in other languages like Python and C++. So let's get right into it. I'll share my screen. So firstly, assuming that you have all installed R, this is probably the interface that you'll see when you turn on this program called R Studio. Remember, there are two programs, R and R Studio, but the one that you are going to be using for programming is R Studio, not R. So yeah, let's get started right away. You see here that I have this right here. This is just to ensure that all of the variables have been reset. You don't really have to do this, but I'm just doing it for the sake of resetting everything and making sure that my workplace is clean. So first of all, I want to assign values to variables, because if you think of when you first learn C++ or Python, the first thing that you do is that you assign a value to a variable. And in RStudio, it just works the same way. But a difference is that if you're using C++, you will probably start with this. But in here, we use something else. We use this arrow sign to assign a value to a variable. So when you do this, you can compile this line of code by pressing Command and Enter at the same time on Mac. I don't know the exact command for Windows, but I think it's gonna be probably something similar. So when I press that, you will see that on the console, there's this line has popped up. And when I type A and press Command Enter, you see here that I get 3. This basically means that 3 has been assigned to the variable A. And in the same way, we can do it for other ones as well, like B. And we can also do it for C. So here in the same way, if we press C, we would get this number that we put into C in the console. And just like we can perform basic calculations in other programming languages, we can also do the same for R. It would probably be like this. But you see that the main difference is that the codes can operate by only these single lines. You don't need like include stdioh or some kind of things like that, which you would normally do in C. And using this, we can also solve the quadratic equation that is like this one. I will use this as an example to show you how calculations work in R. So let's type the quadratic equation, minus b plus qrt. Remember, this is in R, you have to put in these stars to denote the multiplications. Divide by 2a. And when I press this, okay, this is unsplit. Ah, yes. This was the cause. So you see that I made this quadratic equation here. And then again, when I press Command Enter, I get the first root of the quadratic equation ax squared plus bx plus c. I can also do the same one for this one, which is I replace this plus with a minus because in the quadratic equation we have a plus minus sign. So in this case, I also get the other root of this quadratic equation. So this is in essence how these calculations can work. You can also do something like this, a plus b, and you will return 9, which is 3 plus 6. So these kinds of calculations work in the same way in R. So this is quite straightforward, right? This is just all about doing some basic calculations. We just assign values to variables, and then in turn use those variables in order to do a bit of simple calculations. But now we want to go into something that is a little bit more complicated, which is when you installed R, you would have noticed that the time to download R was quite short, right? And that is because there are many, many datasets and many functions in R. But we don't download all of them. We didn't download all of them when you were downloading R. Instead, we only downloaded the built-in functions in R. And the other ones that are necessary, the other ones that we want to use, they are inside something called packages, which we have to download in order to use those functions and datasets. So because you have just installed R, you will probably not have any packages that are installed within your R. So what we do is that you go to this console, you type in install packages and enter the name of the package that you wish to get. So if you see here, there's a full list of like all the packages that are available to you. And we are going to use the one called DS Labs, which is created by the Harvard's biostatistics lab. But we will also be using this package because it has lots of useful and interesting built-in functions and datasets within it. So when you press install packages, okay, I'm getting this because it is already installed on my computer, but when you press Command Enter after typing this, you will probably get like some kind of message that says that install is complete, or like install is happening right now, or like packages are being loaded or something like that. And when you see the sign that the installment has been finished, you go back to here and type library DS Labs. And if you see library DS Labs coming out in the console, you have now loaded this. So when you press install packages, the package is downloaded to your computer, but it isn't brought to this workplace environment in RStudio. When you press library DS Labs, it loads the library and makes it ready for use. So after pressing library DS Labs, we want to load a dataset that is within this library called DS Labs. And we're going to use a one called murders. Sorry, data murders. And you see that when I pressed data murders, this suddenly popped up. And then it says promise here. So murders is a data set that represents like the number of homicides, crimes in each state of the US, as far as I know. So that is basically the data that you have loaded. But we want to see what is inside this data set because we see that something has been loaded, but we cannot see what's inside here, unlike A and B and C, where they are all numerical values. So we want to explore the data set a little bit from here. And the first function that we're going to use is class murders. And when you press class murders, you see this data point frame coming out. And this is one of the types of data structures that is inside RStudio. So in C++, there are things like characters, things like numbers, and think of it in the same way that we use languages. When you're speaking a language, there are things like numbers, there are things like words, there are things like sentences, there's also things like letters, right? So it's quite similar to that. Data frames are when you have like this kind of charts. So what a data frame looks like is going to be clearer as we begin to explore this data set called murders. So basically for now, I think it'll be enough to know that the class of this data set called murders is something called data frame. And what data frame is going to be more clearer very soon. And also, we want to know a bit more about the structure of this object. So here, if we type str murders, we get more detail of this. We get a $sign, and then a state, ABB, region, population, total, each one of these variables. So what are these? To know what these are, we can type head murders, which will show the first few lines of the dataset. So we see state, abbreviation, region, population, total, like this. So you see that when you press str murders, what we got is like values of this, some of the values of this column called total, some of the values of this population, of this column called population, some of the values of this column called region, and then so on and so forth. And CHR represents character, NUM represents numbers, and this also represents factors. So this is the same thing with data frame. Data frame is one type of a data structure. Character is also one type of data structure. Number is also one kind of a data structure. And also another way that we can explore dataset is that if we press in names murders, you get a list of all of these columns of the dataset. So these just basically tell us a bit of information on the dataset. The reason I want to do this is that if we load the dataset murders, it is very long. So in this case, we only have 51 rows. But in a data set where we have many other, much more rows, for example, a data set about a huge population of people, we have like millions of rows, which we don't really want to load them, right? So we explore the data set through a bit of like these functions. But what if we want to extract a single column of this data set? What we use then is the accessor operator. So remember this $sign, right? This $sign can be actually used to load a certain column with this name. So if I say murders $state, it would give me all of the values, all the characters that is inside this column called state. If I write murders $population, it would also give me something like this. So you see that the name why the dollar is called the accessor is because it allows us to access this certain column of the data set. And just as we assigned values to variables, we can do something very similar to here. We can extract the line, the column called population within the dataset murders, and then assign it to this variable called population. There's no need to declare what this population, whether this is a vector, whether this is a number, whether this is a data frame. There's no need to declare this. R is going to do it for you. And here, if we load pop, we would get this, which is the same thing as murders dollar population. And this type of thing is called a vector. And we can also determine the length of this, which is basically how many elements are in here. So if I write length pop and run this, I get the number 51 in the console, which is equal to number of values inside here. You see that this corresponds with nrow murders. And nrow is the function that returns the number of rows in a certain data frame. So nrow murders and length pop is supposed to be the same because one is the number of rows in a single column of murders, and this one is the number of rows in the entire data frame. So they're supposed to be the same. So this is a class called, so if we type in class pop, we would get numeric, which means that all of these are numbers. But remember that we also saw something called factors. Then what would happen if we write murders dollar region? Because it says region is a factor. Would we still get factor? Yes, we indeed get factors because factor is also another type of class. So you see here that in this lecture, we mainly covered how to load packages, how to assign values, and how to use the accessor operator, and also a bit of introduction into some common data structures inside RStudio. So thank you for listening. In our next lecture, I will come back with more information about data types and also a bit of ways to use other functions in order to manipulate this data frame class. So thank you.